Good evening, everybody out there. Quite honored to have such a long list of viewers this evening. No pressure, as they say. But yeah, just quickly to introduce myself. I'm part of the team presenting you this evening. My name is Graham McCulloch. I am originally from Ireland. I moved to Botswana after completing a degree in zoology in 1994. I spent 4 years in the tourism industry here in Botswana. Then I did my PhD here in Botswana, and since then have been doing conservation work on various levels. Firstly through the consultancy industry, and then focused on community-based conservation, specifically with Ecoexist Trust, which I co-founded, and on which forms the topic of this evening's presentation. So yeah, so I'm here with Murray and Ollie, just really to give you a slightly different perspective on conservation. It sort of ties in nicely with last week's presentation that Antonia gave. She gave a really nice overview of human-wildlife conflict, which is the conservation issue that we are talking about and presenting on this evening. So we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into a specific project dealing with human-elephant coexistence in Botswana, in the Okavango Delta. And our story this evening explains how we are using a unique combination of conservation and enterprise, really to unlock solutions for human-elephant coexistence through providing incentives for sustainable practices and behavior that are driving a win-win for people and elephants. It's a story that's a culmination of 15 years of conservation work on this topic in the Okavango Delta in the area. We're part of the largest population of elephants in the world, roam as part of the Kaza TFCA continuous transfrontier conservation area. Northern Botswana, as you know, is home to 130,000 elephants. And that's part of Kaza's population, which is roughly about 220,000 elephants. But it's, 16% of this area is that the habitat for elephants in this area lies outside of protected areas, and that's a landscape shared with many people, many rural communities that rely on subsistence agriculture as a livelihood base. It's a story of collaboration between many partners in the co-design of practical, lasting solutions to conflict and to promote coexistence, building a holistic, workable program that makes it easier for both people and elephants to coexist. The story involves bridging the gap between the conservation and the agricultural sector, two opposing and conflicting sectors, through an integrative approach that attempts to reconcile the respective conflicting policies and land use patterns. And it involves tipping the cost-benefit imbalance of living with elephants. There's very often a huge cost among rural communities with living with elephants, but very, very often little in the way of benefits coming back as a result of sharing the landscape with these gentle giants, who are quite often not so gentle on the ground. when you're trying to grow crops and coexist with them. And it's a good example of how bringing together a diverse band of crafty innovators from various different backgrounds, different skill sets, and professions can unlock solutions that contribute to one of conservation's biggest challenges, human-wildlife conflict. So this, I'll just say that this is the only theory that I'm going to go through. That, seeing as we're at the beginning of the presentation, I'll dive straight into some of the background theory that sets the scene for the story. And I just wanted to present a recent paper that was published last year, that came out really just looking at conservation and entrepreneurship. This really attempts to identify and define the term conservation. It does a really nice job of defining conservation entrepreneurship, which refers to the application of entrepreneurial approach to conservation, practicing conservation entrepreneurship, and the conservation entrepreneurship research that surrounds it, that refers to the application of the theory to understand and better improve such practices and its outcomes. And some of the excerpts from this I just wanted to go through. And one of them just stating that many conservation scholars have recognized that traditional conservation approaches are necessary, but sometimes insufficient to deal with the decline in the Earth's biodiversity. This has led to increasing calls for promoting innovative approaches in the conservation agenda that disrupt business as usual. It's really one of the pivotal practices for implementing change through innovative solutions to conservation problems is conservation entrepreneurship. That being the application of conservation and business principles together to develop innovative solutions, e.g., future products, services, markets, and business models intended to contribute to biodiversity conservation with a financial gain. They premise, and I think this is really, really important, conservation entrepreneurship is not a panacea, but it has the potential to offer relevant approaches that supplement existing conservation efforts. Realizing the full potential of such innovations will require not only their creation, but their successful introduction into markets and other institutions. Entrepreneurship as a crucial engine to the realization of innovations in market economies and as a catalyst of institutional change could become an important social mechanism to this end. Now, it's a bit of theoretical jargon, but I really wanted to sort of start off with this just to set the background to the sort of the merging of our long-term conservation efforts with entrepreneurship in addressing human-elephant conflict and coming up with solutions to coexistence for people and elephants. So what is the connection between bear and elephants? And how does it contribute to conservation? Well, the connection between bear and elephants may not go down so well in this case here, but in order to describe the connection that we want to portray in our story this evening, I have to take you back 15 years to the beginning of the project that we started in the Okavango Delta. And that's through the work of Ecoexist, which is a not-for-profit organization. It's registered in Botswana, and its focus for the last 15 years has been on fostering coexistence between people and elephants in the Okavango Delta. Our mission is to support the lives and livelihoods of people who live with elephants while considering the needs of elephants. And we are a multidisciplinary team combining social, ecological, policy, agricultural experts. I just popped in the link to our website if anybody is interested in finding out more. This is our project area, the Okavango Delta. We do have a main administrative hub in Maun, there in the southern part of the Okavango Delta. But we also have a field base right up in the eastern Okavango Panhandle, up here, near a village called Iretsa. Just to put it into context, this is a map of the Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area. Here's the Okavango Delta area that we work in, inside this yellow oval shape. And we are part of, very much part of, some critical components of this CASA TFCA. We are part of two of the really important wildlife dispersal areas that have been identified that are critical for the movement and connectivity of many large mammal species across the landscape. Those are the Kwando WDA, moving, which channels many wildlife species from the Okavango area, the region along the Linyanti Kwando, up through Namibia into Angola and Zambia, and also the Kaudum and Ngamiland wildlife dispersal area, which is an area where wildlife species move between the Okavango and Namibia's Kaudum National Park area. So the focus of our project really falls under two main categories. And one is, the first one was really, we wanted to meet the immediate needs of the situation. And that was really to address the conflict incidences, which primarily, they primarily manifest in as crop raiding among the subsistent farmers' fields, but also there's obviously in this area we have roughly 18,000 elephants living with 18,000 people, so there's one elephant for every person. So the likelihood of confronting elephants is high, and negative confrontations do occur. And so that also forms part of this human-wildlife conflict incidents. But, in terms of reducing crop raiding by elephants, we started by building a community-based conflict management system, which is really addressing the symptoms of human-elephant conflict, and trying to prevent elephants entering fields, using various different deterrents, solar flashing lights, chili deterrents, beehive fencing, solar electric fencing, and layering all of these different deterrent techniques to try and target elephants' various senses, just to build these barriers, passive barriers, if you like, to prevent them entering fields and eating farmers' crops. Some of these deterrents also are placed around compounds to protect people in their compounds, at their households. but yeah, so that's really was the first need, the immediate need, and forms a main pillar of the approach of Ecoexist. The second part is addressing the underlying drivers or the root causes of the conflict. And this began with a long-term research project that was conducted by Dr. Anna Songhurst, my partner and co-director of Ecoexist. And she spent 3 years collecting a lot of data, social and ecological data, on the drivers of conflict, what was causing most of the conflict incidences. And one of the main underlying drivers, in fact, the main, looking at various different GLM modeling and statistics, is, this conflicting land use. So basically, the closer a farmer is to one of the main movement corridor routes, the more likely the farmer is and the field is to be entered by elephants and the crops to be eaten, which kind of makes sense. The closer you are to many elephants moving on a daily basis from critical resources, the higher the likelihood that you will face elephants and experience crop raiding. So to address this, Ecoexist has been working for the last decade with many stakeholders, first and foremost, in this case, with the land use authorities, the Tawana Land Board, really to bring this evidence to the forefront in land use planning, and really to recognize these critical movement corridors when land is being allocated. And so fast forward 10 years, and we have identified through participatory approach the main critical corridors, including community participation and all of that in a way that the land authority recognizes the importance of avoiding allocation of more fields inside these corridors, just to avoid exacerbating the problem. And this is addressing one of the underlying drivers, like I said. There are more details. The way we have done this, gone about it through a process called the Land Use Conflict Identification Strategy, which is a participatory modeling process. More details can be found on this website here, which is a case study that was written by the FAO and the IUCN Human Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence Specialist Group as a case study, which will give you more information and details about the process. So it really, building on this really important aspect of the approach, addressing underlying drivers, we really use that to build a landscape approach to addressing human-elephant conflict and promoting coexistence, and that really incorporates a number of themes. First and foremost, building on the work that Anna did and increasing our understanding of the elephant population, their movement, and the resource use and needs of the elephants, and plugging that evidence into future interventions and co-design processes. And these corridors are a great example of that. Around the corridors, focusing on community-based conflict mitigation strategies around the fields. These green areas are existing fields, and the corridor here on this map is this area with a buffer zone around it. And these corridors the land authorities have agreed not to allocate inside them in future land allocation processes. And then the fields, we then identify ways to better protect them. In the corridors, we identify opportunities for improved benefit generation, activities, enterprise development. And inside the fields, inside the fences that protect fields, there's a big need to improve farming resilience and sustainability through the practices of conservation agriculture, selection of crops, diversifying crop types, etc. The landscape approach also gave us a really great opportunity to address some of the other drivers of conflict, and leveraging support for solutions to those drivers. One of the biggest is this chronic stress of living and moving across the landscape that is shared with elephants. And some of that movement includes children walking to school every day, every morning and every afternoon, backwards and forwards for 4 or 5 kilometers across elephant corridors. And one of the solutions to that was coming up with the Elephant Express bus service. And we leveraged support from local private sector, the natural selection in this case, which is a tourism operator in the area. And we now have 3 of these buses that pick up children every morning and bring them back and forth to school across these corridors, and addressing this underlying chronic stress that drives up negative perceptions and decreases tolerance. So this is a solution, one of the solutions that we have worked towards to address that. You know, and another big driver is the lack of benefits, like I mentioned earlier. It's a big driver of perceived human-elephant conflict. You know, it's you very often come across a lot of negative perceptions and a lot of negative attitudes towards elephants. Understandably, when farmers lose a lot of their crops, their livelihoods, and you know, lives are lost every year as a result of this conflict. So in order to achieve or to address this driver, a big pillar of what we do is to try and add value to elephants, and through creation of wildlife-based enterprises. And some of the low-hanging fruit is, you know, the Okavango Delta has a great burgeoning tourism industry, and we started off by attempting to diversify that tourism industry, and in so doing, bring more people to the communities to learn and experience and conduct activities with the communities that are based around a life with elephants. So this is the Life with Elephants tour. It's one example of one of the enterprises that we established a number of years ago now, and it's been a huge success. Many clients come from various high-end tourism camps in the Okavango and fly out to Aretsa village to come and spend 2.5, 3 hours with this community group, and the money goes straight to the communities. And yeah, it's been a huge success, and we've built on this and diversified some tourism activities even further. There's also a spin-off industry. Elephant themed crafts are another way to leverage a life with elephants to help access markets through elephant themed crafts and improve livelihoods. This is the Yokoti basket weavers. It's a group of 70 women that now sell baskets into the US every year that are elephant themed. They designed this elephant themed basket themselves. But you know, there's many craftsmen. There's a lot of talent in the area, but obviously one of the big challenges is linking them to markets. And this is an example of how we've worked to create this distribution hubs to assist craft makers to get linked to markets. So she is, Solano here has established a Saronga craft shop, and she basically links craftsmen and women to markets in the Delta and elsewhere. And she provides some quality control and price management, etc. Beekeeping, I think you've probably all heard of the beehive fences that Lucy King from Save the Elephants designed and came up with this amazing solution that's a win-win-win for elephants and people. You know, constructing beehive fences around fields, and the idea is that elephants are afraid of bees, and by hanging them on the fences, if the elephants do disturb the fence, the bees get disturbed and swarm, and the elephants skedaddle and get out of there. You know, and then obviously the honey that's harvested can then be sold to improve livelihood benefits. So it's a great model. We are trialing that now in the Okavango Delta. There are some challenges in a dry area, woodland area, but we do have a collection of beekeepers that have formed a cooperative, the Diovea Honey Cooperative here, which is now running business and sells honey into the tourism industry. We've also identified Veld products as a potential source of livelihood improvement for the areas, that also protect some of the trees, for example, fruiting trees from elephant damage, because it brings a value to those trees. And we've developed feasibility studies to make it sustainable, purchase processing equipment for a cooperative, and we've established a link to market for some of the forest fruits already for the beverage manufacturing industry. But I think the focus here really, these are great examples of how we can diversify livelihoods. But at the end of the day, 70% of the livelihoods are dependent on subsistence agriculture. We've spent the last decade developing what we call elephant-aware farming, really to try and, first of all, reduce the conflict, but also to try and leverage what the farmers do in changing their practices and behavior into an opportunity that they can benefit from, that both gives them an incentive to carry on practicing their mitigation measures and conservation agriculture, but also rewards them for those efforts. Who is an elephant-aware farmer? A farmer that identifies the importance and respects elephant corridors, conducting agriculture outside of the corridors, practicing conservation in agriculture inside that field to make it more sustainable, to reduce the need for slash and burn practices, and to move further into elephant habitat and reduce the conversion of that habitat, and enables them to stay there for a lot longer, improving soil quality, improving yields. Using appropriate mitigation techniques is another criteria of an elephant-aware farmer, and diversifying some crops and using cash crops. And so all of these different practices contribute to an elephant-aware farming model. We've formed elephant-aware farming cooperatives. We found very early on that cooperative learning and support and peer field visits really helped in terms of motivation and sustaining elephant-aware practices, but also key to accessing markets. So we've established supply chains, using conservation agriculture practices. This is an ox-drawn no-till planter that plants without having to plow, and using oxen, which is really, really important because it's adapting to traditional farming methods. We've tried tractor driven, we've tried basin methods, but this seems to be a great way of scaling up this practices, the practice of no-till planting. Intercropping with legumes, really important. But then obviously also storage. So much of the farmers in this area and elsewhere, so much of their harvest, their yield is lost just due to rot or pest invasion. So storing it properly has had obviously a huge impact, and reducing that waste and maximizing the food security first and foremost, and then the potential to sell surplus to the market. A really important part of this link is that once you have surplus produce, we would place a higher value on the surplus of elephant aware farmers because of all of the practices and behaviors that they've done to coexist with elephants, and at the end of the crop season produce a yield that feeds their family, and potentially some of which they can sell. How can we really track and monitor that all the farmers are doing just that? And conservation agreements are a really important part of this supply chain and the value chain that we've created here. And really, it's farmers sign a conservation agreement at the beginning of each crop season to agree that they will practice what elephant aware farming entails. And at the end of the crop season, they're evaluated accordingly. And that's then gives them access to a market that will pay them a higher price for their surplus produce. So that's a really important part of, the transparency in this, and making sure that, that the story is true at the end of the day. In order to monitor and track this and evaluate the farmers, we've developed an app. It's adapted from a farming app, but it basically registers farmers, collects all their critical data, and that includes their personal data, which is not shared with anybody, but also their field data, their crop data, the amount of land they farm each season. It tracks the area under cultivation, and the area that they've cultivated under conservation agriculture. It also identifies their location in relation to the elephant corridors, and any new fields or expansion of existing fields then disqualify farmers from being certified elephant aware. So this then really gave us an opportunity, and one of the big challenges for us was, and I think this is true for most interventions to human-wildlife conflict, how do you make these interventions sustainable? And how do you motivate farmers to continue to make an effort to protect their fields, to practice a more sustainable farming, which takes a lot more effort. So we really wanted to try and leverage the value addition of what they're doing to coexist with elephants into generating a higher price for their surplus produce that they were getting now because of what they were doing. And so we needed to find a way to add value to that produce. And we chose one of their staple grains, which is the most popular grain grown for subsistence purposes in this area, which is millet, and really developed the value chain around that. And in order to do that, I'm going to stop here for now and hand you over to Murray, because Murray's the expert on how this millet was turned into craft beer and how we leveraged that value addition to generate that additional value that we could pass right back to the farmer. So so I'll keep changing the slides, but I'll hand over to you, Murray, for now, and I'll chat to you later.
Okay, great. Thanks, Graham. I'm here. I'm just currently sitting in the dark because we've dropped power. But I am here, so you just can't see me. Right. Hi, everyone. I'm Murray Stevenson. I'm the head brewer here at Okavango Craft Brewery. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. I did studied zoology at varsity, and then took a pretty different career and got into brewing. And I worked in brewing in Cape Town for about 6 or 7 years, the likes of Jack Black and Woodstock Brewery. And then I moved up to Botswana about 3 years ago to head up the brewery here. Yeah, so if I just wanted to kick off and talk a little bit more about millet. Millet is a grain that is kind of growing in popularity at the moment. And that's for a number of reasons. Millet is climate resilient. It's drought resistant. It can grow in very low fertile soils, requires very little water to grow, and it's a carbon sink. So it's a very low impact crop that grows very well. There's also a lot of nutritional benefits to millet. It's gluten-free. It's got high protein, high fiber, and also antioxidant contents. So that's why last year, in 2023, the UN actually declared it the year of the millet, as they tried to promote millet for food sources, and to try to get people using millet and growing millet more. So when Ecoexist and some entrepreneurs were trying to build a market for some of the produce up in the Panhandle, and they were looking for ways to use millet, the obvious thought was in some food products, like making flours and selling the grains to camps and restaurants around the area. But I think when that light bulb moment really hit them when they thought of the idea of using millet to create beer as a vessel to kind of tell the story and use a lot of millet. So if we look at the brewing process on the next slide, there are four main ingredients that go into beer making. You've got your grain, water, hops, and yeast. And your grain is one of the largest ingredients by volume that goes into making beer, along with water. So it was a great idea to think of using all of the surplus grain to try and make beer. And if we look in the first few steps of that diagram, you've got your malt storage, but then you've got to mill your grain and then steep it in your mash tank to be able to convert your starches within your grain into sugars that will later be fermented into alcohol and CO2 to make your beer. Most modern beer is made with malted barley. So your modern craft breweries will use mostly malted barley, and your big mass-producing beers are using malted barley and some other carbohydrate source, like an adjunct that can give them these starches. There aren't many breweries using millet. We've been speaking to one in India that's trying to use millet as kind of a sustainable grain. They're using local millet to make beer. I've seen a brewery in Australia that's trying to be fully gluten-free. And there is a small maltery in the States that's supplying some breweries, I think, for gluten-free brewing. But millet, is not widely used for brewing. So a lot of what we've been doing here is to try and find out how best we can use it to make beer, and how we can pioneer methods to make make some good beer. Yeah, also, I mean, one of the big things for us as well, I think, is to try and use, because this grain is coming locally, we want to try and use so much more of the local grain, and it stops us from bringing things in our beer production. And this kind of, I guess, sustainable trend of using local grains is quite prominent in the brewing industry. People are very interested in it at the moment. And the African Beer Cup, which is a competition that judges beers throughout the whole of Africa, they've recently added a category for African grains to try and promote breweries in Africa to use more local grains, use what is available to them to create beer. And these beers are being judged, alongside barley brewed beers as well. Yeah, so if we go to the next slide. Before we use millet in the brewery, it has to be malted. You can use raw millet for making beer, but we feel that it needs to be malted so that it adds a little bit more flavor, a little bit more complexity to the beer, and makes the beers taste more like beers like people are used to drinking. So unlocks the potential within the grain to turn it into beer. Malting is kind of like sprouting, where you steep the grain in water, you're allowing that seed to start growing into a plant. And once it starts growing, we are drying it and kind of locking the potential within that grain into the seed. And the same way that seed would naturally grow in the ground, we are allowing it to go through that process and unlocking the potential for us to then use it in the brewery. So that process is kind of meticulously controlled in a malt house before your grain makes its way to the brewery. And we currently have a small, I would call it a bit of an R&D malt house that we are malting a small amount of millet for use in the brewery. And it's probably a bit of a bottleneck for us at the moment, but we are exploring ways to be able to malt more millet and to be able to use more millet as well. So we are using this millet. If we go over to the next slide, we're using this millet and still a mixture of malted barley to make our beers. We kind of started small by using a small amount of millet because we wanted to produce a range of beers that we thought were palatable, that people would want to drink, instead of jumping in with 2 feet and trying to produce millet beers. So we started small, and we've been growing the amount of millet that we are using in our beers at the moment. And we've currently got a range of these 5 shown here, but we distribute mainly our lager, our pale ale, we've got a session IPA and a stout. And they all use kind of varying degrees of millet in their recipes. So for example, in our Delta lager, we're using 50% millet and 50% malted barley in the grain bill of that beer. And the others are between about 30 and 40%. And we're quite happy with how that's working out for us, because it's quite interesting in a beer like a lager where you don't have much place to hide, like you can't hide behind your malts or your hops. Our lager is really a platform that can allow the millet to shine, and you can get a bit of a taste for what millet actually tastes like, and see what that added kind of earthy, nutty grain flavor is like in a beer. We have also produced some 100% millet beers on our small batch, and we've made a lager and a golden ale that we've been pretty happy with. And at the moment, we're kind of trying to increase as I was saying in the previous slide, trying to increase our malt capacity so that we actually have enough malted millet to be able to produce a 100% malted millet beer on kind of our production scale. So we are getting there, and we hope to keep pushing and get there soon. These beers are available here in Maun where we brew them. We sell them from our brewery and our tap room on site. We supply some restaurants in Maun area, and then camps and lodges in the Delta as well. And then also some of the larger towns like Kasane and Gaborone. And then if we go on to the next slide as well. We've also, because we've got a tap room on site, we've also tried to kind of keep things interesting, and we've made a range of once-off interesting beers where we try and also use some of those other felt products that Graham was speaking about that are harvested from kind of the Panhandle area. And we created a marula sour beer using yeast that we cultivated from the Panhandle and marula collected from that area, and kind of made a champagne version of beer. And we've also created an imperial stout using jackleberry that was collected in the area. So yeah, that's kind of a summary of the brewery. And I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Ollie, who's going to tell you a bit more about his involvement in the whole project.
Yeah, I'm Ollie. Let me first appreciate everyone who is watching, and introduce myself and how I get involved with the project. To start with, I was born and raised in the area where the project is operating, and then before I joined the project, I started noticing it while I was schooling, and then because of the motivation that they have on us and the support that they had for the community, it inspired me to come back after my school journey and join them and see how can I put my effort so that I can also contribute in building up my community. Like I was saying, I'm born and raised in one of the villages in the Okavango Peninsula, a village named Eretsa. And one of the villages that is next to the elephant corridors that is very, very active. And then what I did is that when I joined them, before joining them, maybe something that I want to share is that it was not easy to live in the area, especially during schooling times, because it was difficult for you to attend schools. And then when Ecoexist came in and start coming out with solutions of how they can help us making things in a better way, and then that's where I get inspired. And then after I completed like my school journey, I joined the Ecoexist team, where I had the privilege of being a research assistant. And then I started getting research assistant with Susan Vogel from Netherlands. And then that's where I started gaining the knowledge of what is happening in the nature, and what we can take from how we can deal with nature, and what we can do and what we cannot do. And then after I gained that knowledge, then I ended up having like more energy, or inspired more to continue with them and see where's the end of the project is going. And else again, I wanted like other community members to see and motivated by me as I'm going with them and working with them, because obviously they will be asking me as their community member, and then I will explaining the things better to them in their local languages, and even others in our languages. And even when we have like negotiations back at home, then I have an advantage of bringing in more better ideas than the one that they are discussing by the moment. Yeah, maybe what I would like to say is that then after the research was finished, I managed to move to Maun, where the brewery was being opened, because I was also keen to take part in making sure that the product that our farmers are producing, that is Ecoexist are putting more efforts to protect and to educate the people on how they can deal with the elephants and farms for win-win situation. Then I realized that it's very important for me to move and for the brewery, so that I can learn the other new skills that I can explain again to the community and encourage them to keep farming and protecting elephants as only one way that we can survive from the Panhandle, because it's one area that is focused, is based in farming and rearing of livestock as a main activity. Therefore, if us part of the community doesn't take maybe the importance of elephants into consideration. It means we're not going to have something else that can bring opportunities to us. And then that's where I came and joined again the Okavango Craft Brewery to have knowledge and share the knowledge back to the community so that they can be inspired as well. Yeah, and for working reasons and for us to have a living. Yeah, that's like the journey that I had. But before I can conclude, I would like to maybe invite every one of you who is watching to visit Botswana, especially coming to the Okavango Craft Brewery and have a taste for the beer, because the more the beer is going out, the more the millet is coming into the brewery, and the more the millet is coming into the brewery, is the more the farmers are benefiting. It's like a circle. Then yeah, that's like my summary of how I joined Ecoexist and what inspired me to come in.
Yeah. Great. Oli, thank you. And Murray, thanks a lot. I'm just going to finish off quickly. Obviously, you know, I want to circle back to how this is all contributing to conservation. And, you know, we've been collecting a lot of data on you know, how the efforts, elephant-aware farming, how it's reducing human-elephant conflict incidences and, you know, sustaining motivation and practice, and the income generated by farmers that's improving livelihoods, collecting qualitative information on positive change and perceptions among farmers, and, you know, and the realization of the value of elephants and unlocking market-linked livelihood improvement opportunities. So all of these stats are looking really good, and we're currently writing some publications at the moment on that details all of that. But some of the other societal benefits of this merging of conservation and entrepreneurship that we didn't necessarily set out to achieve, but have been really evident since the whole story unfolded. And the beer started flowing, is one of them. I just wanted to highlight it. One of them is the increased awareness of the issue, and a solution to the issue. You know, and very often we find it hard. It's very difficult for us to communicate such a difficult issue to the general populace. But through the beer, we found that we've leveraged a lot of attention and a lot of focus on the subject, and a lot of goodwill towards, you know, understanding the subject more and supporting the subject more. So, and that's huge. That's huge in terms of gaining some appreciation of what it's like to live with elephants, and also, you know, some of the solutions that we can support that contribute to a win-win for people and elephants. But also, you know, we often say one of the best ways of, you know, protecting or contributing to the conservation of elephants is by supporting the people who live with them. You know, if we want free roaming elephants for our future generations, most of their habitat lies outside protected areas. And if we want to avoid confining them to fenced off protected areas in the future, we need to address and come up with solutions to this problem. So one of the best ways of doing that is supporting the people who share the same landscape. And we think that beer is a nice, accessible way to do just that. So I'd like to just finish there and just say cheers. And yeah, I'm really happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure Murray and Ollie are. And thanks so much for logging on and listening.
Thank you so much, you guys. So we'll get started on the Q&A now. There's a lot of questions that have come in from the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and read those ones out. If anyone would like to ask their question out loud, please do put your hand up or just wave at me on the camera. But for now, let's do the chat questions. So just a few comments first to start off with. Great work, excellent range of economic activities beyond the low-hanging fruit that is tourism, from Sybil Reed-Miller, thank you. Some great job comments. Sybil has also posted in here about her business that she runs, the conservation business. That's in Chumbe Island Coral Park in Zanzibar, Tanzania, which is a non-for-profit, privately established and managed marine protected area and forest reserve, when their income is generated from an eco lodge they have on the island. So thank you for that information, Sybil. Her website's also there. From Nana, excellent work assisting and motivating farmers who suffer the consequences of elephant destructions. Really great question here from Sandra Hardy. So interesting. How do you control pests on the millet?
Yeah, good question. So pests come in all various shapes and sizes, from elephants to small tiny weevils. Weevils are a big issue, especially when the grain is stored. And farmers have addressed this by storing in traditional grain bins, which are pretty effective, but obviously still there's some infestation, and this we've had to address and improve storage facilities accessible to farmers. Other pests are birds, quelea. We do get some huge flocks of quelea sometimes after a good rainy season in particular, and they can cause havoc. And so, yeah, a traditional way is the bullwhip that they crack to drive off the birds. But you know, some of these flocks are number tens of thousands at a time. So yeah, there's various different pests and various different ways that we have to adopt to try and overcome them.
Great, thank you for that, and thank you for that question, Sandra. Really good question. Richard, you've got your hand up, so I'll go to you and then back to the chat.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm one of those who tasted the beer, the Okavango beer. So, and I suspect that Oli moved to Maum because of it. Yeah, so I want to ask, I went to the brewery for a conservation discussion over the beer. You had conservation podcasts. Are they still going, and do you want to share, you know, do you want to share some information on what they are about? I think that would be useful to the audience. I think you can say it better. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll pitch in, and then Murray, Ollie, you can add to it if you like. Yeah, I mean, when the brewery was opened, obviously the owners were very keen to try and keep the theme of conservation at the heart of the brand, but also the activities and the events at the brewery. And the brewery does have a tap room, bar, restaurant. And so there was a partnership developed between the brewery, tap room, and the Okavango Research Institute and Kwando Safaris, which hold it's called Conservation on Tap. Once a month, they get experts on different topics of conservation, and they sit down and invite the general public to come and listen to small presentations and interactions and ask questions, and it's been a great success.
Great, thank you for that. Thanks for that question, Richard. Okay, back to the chat. We have a lot of questions pertaining to the sort of brewing process. One of the questions from Patience is, why is millet not traditionally popular in the brewing process?
I think millet is very traditionally popular in the brewing process. I think it's been used for kind of traditional beers for a very long time. But modern beers in the kind of the way they're made, millet is not a great grain for making them. Barley is like perfectly suited because of its the structure of the seed, the amount of starch that it holds, and the kind of enzymes enzymes and other properties of it that are in the seed that are almost perfectly suited to make beer. Whereas in millet, you lack a lot of those sort of things. You don't have a big husk, which means that you have processing problems. It doesn't have a large starch reserve, so you don't get a lot of sugars out of it. And you don't really have those enzymes to break it down. So you actually have to sometimes, when you start increasing the amount of millet you're using, you actually have to add external enzymes to break your starches down into sugars. So like one of the problems we had with our 100% millet beers as well was you get kind of low amount of sugar, and also you kind of doesn't form a head because you don't get your proteins within the grain that form that head on a beer. There's kind of elements like that make it difficult to use millet for brewing.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting. Okay, so we've got another question here in the chat from Octavia from TUT. And I would like to point out that there are a lot of students from TUT, the Toronto University of Technology, in tonight. So thank you guys so much for joining, and also to Dr. Cheryl Ogilvie for being the driver behind that. So thanks, guys. So Octavia is asking, what is the optimal season for planting millet?
Yeah, or maybe Ollie, you can answer that one better than me.
Yeah, usually we receive our first rainy season this side maybe around during this time, January, February, and then but I think it depends on the rain, because sometimes it cannot come, but yeah, I think January, you can start from November, so that because now we are striving to be against the active movements of elephants down, like Graham was saying already. They're trying to bring in like the new ways of doing it. And then, I would say maybe it'd be nice to start around November, so that April you are already out of the farms.
Great, thank you. And then another great question from the chat from Sandra Hardy. How do you control waste into the Okavango water systems?
Yeah, waste is a difficult one in the brewery. We've got kind of a complex waste system. We try and we do pretty much collect all of our solid waste that comes out of the brewery. We're collecting it, and we give most of it to a guy who's growing black flies on it, and then using those black fly maggots for protein. Maybe something that we haven't really mentioned is that our brewery is very small. So we don't get, I think the amount of maggots that he's getting out of it, he's kind of using to feed his chickens and some animal feed. So it's not a huge amount. But we collect all of our solid waste, and most of it goes to him. Other goes to local farmers. Local guys around here who have chickens and stuff like that. And then the water is a little bit more of a trickier one, where we have kind of a few blending systems and filter systems, and it eventually flows to our own kind of wetland at the bottom of the property. And then it goes through the wetland, and then we use that water, leftover water, on our garden.
Okay, fantastic. That's really fascinating about the black flies. That's a really cool way to reuse that resource. And then a question from Kirsten Necke in the chat, which I think we're all dying to know. Where can you buy your beer?
I'll take that one again. So again, because our brewery is quite small, we are struggling to get it out as far and wide as we would like. So at the moment, we are available all around Maun, and then in the camps within the Delta, a few of them, and the bigger cities like Kasane and Gabs, and available in retail, available in some bars and restaurants. But we are looking at ways to try and expand that and get it out further to more people, maybe even potential of looking at getting it into South Africa as well soon, and looking at exporting. Yeah, so there are some options, but at the moment, best case would be to come and visit us and drink it from the source.
I think we'd all love to do that. I'd like to ask that if you do start importing it, please put Kenya on top of your list. Okay, some more questions in the chat, some really lovely comments of praise from everyone in the chat. I do, and some important information as well, some interesting information being shared by people in the audience. So please do have a look in the chat. What have we got? Okay, so question from Luca Sapir. He's wondering whether legaling the ivory trade could be something that could be considered a conservation entrepreneurship model, and obviously that would be a massive detriment to the elephant conservation in South Africa. Would that ever happen? Is that an option?
We might leave that to the CITES people to decipher. It's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a very tough one, but I think those decisions will be made by the higher ups. But thank you for your question, Luca. And I see also Sybil has replied to that. Totally different discussion. Unfortunately, any legalizing of wildlife products like ivory would be used in criminal networks for laundering illegal ivory and driving up poaching, which has happened in East Africa in the past. Thank you for that response, Sybil. Richard, I see you've got your hand up. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you. Mine is on the long term, and yeah, how's the population of elephants? What are the trends, and what are those of the community? Do you think it's going to be a challenge and maybe needing even more innovative measures? Well, how do you see the future in your struggle to in your efforts to help the people and elephants coexist? Because I think maybe in a situation where the elephant population is growing and the human population is growing, then the intersection will overlap even more. So how do you see the future in your efforts? Thank you.
Yeah, great, Richard. Thanks for that question. Yeah, it's a tricky one again, but just to give you some context, the population of Botswana is at around 130,000 elephants. That population is stable, has been for a while now, since the last two big surveys of the country. And yeah, there are areas though, like the Eastern Okavango Panhandle, where the population has increased in those areas, and that does have a big impact on the perceptions, the negative perceptions towards elephants, and this feeling that there's a massive herd of elephants that is growing on your doorstep. It does make it quite difficult for communities to see solutions when there's a situation like that. But having said that, there are a lot of initiatives ongoing that are trying to, one of the biggest solutions to that and solutions to the elephant population management is to ensure movement and connectivity of the elephant population with places elsewhere across the boundary with Namibia, up into Angola and Zambia, into Zimbabwe on the other side. So especially in times of drought, this movement, and ensuring that this large landscape can be utilized, and by elephants that need to move out of high pressure areas is key. And that's one of our big challenges. And I think the CASA Secretariat is working with a number of groups on this specific topic, and that holds potential to really kind of address some of those issues of you know, pressure and releasing pressure in some areas. But yeah, I hope that's answers your query there, Richard. Good question.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for that, and thank you for such an interesting question, Richard. So sadly, we are running a little bit out of time. We've had some wonderful questions and a really wonderful talk. One last question from me is, well, there's one other question in the chat actually, which pertains to this, and that is from Tom from Rhino Mercy. Are you planning on, or are you able to use millet to make any whiskies that you might be planning on? And second to that, do you do any 0% alcohol beers?
Yeah, distillation is definitely something we've spoken about. It would be a great way to use a large amount of millet. And yeah, I think once you've distilled the product, it's maybe also easier to handle than beer is. But kind of as we've set out from the beginning to make beer, we're kind of following that path at the moment. And I think as things expand, distilling would be a great way to go with millet. So it is also something we've spoken about and would love to be able to do, but at the moment, I guess we don't have the equipment to do it. I guess would be the answer. And then we have made a 0% or 0.5% alcohol beer that we were selling through the tap room, called the Mock Charge. And yeah, it was pretty popular, but we were doing it on a very small scale again, so it becomes quite difficult to control and manage. And it's not something that we've scaled up on the big system to actually make it a product that we produce on an ongoing basis.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that. So sadly, we are out of time. I can see there are some questions coming through in the chat here. But I'm hoping that a lot of people will have had their questions answered, and Moret has posted in the chat the links to your different websites, and hopefully you'd be able to ask their questions through there. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you, Graham, Murray, Ollie. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise. So great to hear your stories, and really, really amazing work that you guys are doing. And thank you to everyone so much for joining. We had a really big audience from all over today, which was really great to see. Thank you so much for all your wonderful questions. These questions will, we will take a copy of the chat for the questions and comments to share with you guys, Graham, Murray and Ollie, so that you can see. And if there are any questions going forward that haven't been answered, hopefully we will be able to get the answers back and relay those to the people that asked the questions at some point. So we've taken up enough of everyone's time, and really great event this evening. So I just want to say again, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for coming. And I hope you all have a really wonderful evening. And see you all next week, hopefully, and every week after that.
Thanks so much. Thank you,
Yes, thank you.
guys.
Yes.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.